Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about any specific book that I read, but rather I want to talk about what I did read in January and what I plan to read in February. So overall, I think I read fewer books in January than I have any other time that I've been doing this booktube channel. And I think that's largely because I read Dune. I started reading it in mid-December, but it took me all the way through January, just because at one point I had stopped reading, but also because there's just so much within Dune. It's jam-packed full of things to think about, and plot events, and character development, and world building. And Frank Herbert is an incredible writer, but he's also a very densely packing type of writer who has a lot to say. But overall, Dune was pretty fun, and I also read a couple of other things, but not everything I wanted to get to in January. So that's been extended into February. So without further ado, let's talk about what I did read in January and what I do plan to read in February. And after that, we'll move on from there. So in terms of books that I read in January, one of them was Dune, which I thought was pretty complex. I just got done finishing talking about it in the introduction here. But yeah, Dune was a complex, interesting book that I think had a lot to say about environmentalism and capitalism and fear and the idea of the Messiah that I think will be continued in future installments in the Dune series. So look out for those videos in the future, perhaps. I don't know when I'll ever be able to get to Dune Messiah, but I want to, because just the ideas that I know Frank Herbert has instilled in them, it should make for a very explosive and interesting book, especially because I want to see how Paul's character advances forward in his effort to stop a galactic jihad that I don't think he'll be able to, just because he set those events in motion. But that remains to be seen. So very interesting book that I can see why people absolutely adore. Then I also read Beautiful Country by Xian Julie Wang, which I thought was very sad, not in a pitiful kind of way, just kind of, it had a melancholic tone to it. I think she was aware of that tone too, as she addresses it in the sort of like end of the book. But I also thought it was pretty motivating in terms of understanding more about how undocumented immigrants, like their experience in the United States. I know that Xian's experience isn't encompassing of the entire undocumented immigrant story, but it's the case for many of them how they feel that fear and how the system just hasn't done anything really. Like, it hasn't gone out of its way, but it hasn't even done the minimum necessary to make sure that we have a system for helping the undocumented immigrants in the United States, so that they're not exploited or left behind, which is the case for Wang and her family in this story. So a lot to really think about, a lot to do as I consider my political efforts in the future. I also read The Nobody by Jeff Lemire, which I thought was fine. It didn't stand out to me about anything. It was mainly a story that incorporated the Invisible Man into it, and I think it had a lot of potential, but it seemed more interested in telling the story of a small town reacting to a stranger coming within it, which I thought was kind of relatable, given that I was from a small town, and this is how small town Iowa would have reacted to a very unusual person coming to the town. But I thought Lemire could have done a little bit more, but it was fine the way it was. And then I also read Batman Incorporated, which was about, I think, volume 1. I thought it was fine. not very interesting, kind of boring overall, just because there were many different plot threads that I don't feel the writers had effectively written. I think this was by Grant Morrison too, who is a pretty good writer. I love their adaptation of not adaptation, but the story Arkham Asylum: A Serious House on a Serious Earth, which Grant Morrison did extremely well. But the other stories that I've encountered by Morrison have felt lacking, maybe because they're too wide scoped, and Grant Morrison does really well with something more narrowly focused. Batman Incorporated focused on multiple global elements that I don't feel all came together, and like Arkham Asylum. But I still would like to check out more of what Grant Morrison has done as it pertains to Batman comics, and I'll talk more about that as I go into what I plan to read in February. As for short stories, I read a number of short stories in January. Overashki's Trains by Laura Bapniar, which I thought was good. I'm finding myself, forgetting more and more about it as time goes on, so perhaps it wasn't as memorable as it could have been, but I still think it did some interesting things with how we react to learning bad news, especially about those we love. I also read Desiree's Baby by Kate Chopin, which I thought was the best short story that I read in January. It was incredibly deep, one of those stories where you could analyze every single line, and a lot to say about how we view people who are black, or even people who have a biracial history, and also it had something to do with how we view women and how they take the responsibility for assuming the tragedies of American history. So I did think there was a lot to it, and a lot that was good. Go watch my video for you to learn more about the exact ideas that I had about it. But I do recommend that one in particular if you're going to read a short story going forward. I also read Flight by John Steinbeck, which I thought was decent. I did say that in the story, Steinbeck could have done more to liven up the story and not just make it someone marching through the desert to their death without any other events or any other things of substance happening in the story. But Steinbeck is a great writer, so of course it's going to get you sucked into the story regardless of the ultimate quality of it. And I also read Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut, which I thought was hilariously bad. I mentioned in a video that it really sold me on not wanting to read Vonnegut in the future, just because of the weird messages that he was sending and the unusual writing style that he seemed to employ. I will say that it is possible that I could just be misunderstanding it, and it could be satire in a way that I don't get. But again, the question is, what is Vonnegut satiring here? Is he satiring, cult leaders? Is he satiring the future, or what things were like in the 1960s at the time he wrote this? Personally, I think he might be saying something about how the society that these people lived in this dystopia was so bad that the only way to shock people out of the complacency within it is to rape them, which is, again, it's a hilariously bad message. And no matter what interpretation you try to make of Welcome to the Monkey House, it just doesn't look good for Vonnegut. And so it's hard to really find him compelling as a writer now, even though this is the only thing I've written about. Maybe it can only go up from here, but it could also just go down into the depths of despair that I don't know. And I'm just not ready to, encounter the worst that Vonnegut has to offer. And then I also read a number of poems in the month of January. Go check out my Poetry Thursday videos to learn more. It's always fun to talk about poetry. But as for February, what do I plan on reading in February? One thing that I plan to read in February for books is The Shadow King by Minge Mengiste, I believe is her name. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But that's going to be one of the first things I had planned to read that in January. but I just didn't have enough time because, again, Dune took so much time to get through. I also want to read Cannery Row, which I checked out from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. I got a pretty interesting book. Like, the art for it was pretty fascinating, and I think after I finish it, because I'm probably going to like Cannery Row, because it's Steinbeck, of course. So I think I'm going to buy that specific edition, because hopefully they're still selling it, because it's a pretty beautiful cover that I'll show you once I finish the book. And then I'm also going to read How the Other Half Eats, which is a book that I'm reading for my book club. Shout out again to Bevan, who still hasn't created her own booktube channel. The interesting thing is Bevan is going to India. Don't want to say too much about that, but like she's getting married next month, but she still has a book club scheduled when she's going to be in India. So I think that's fascinating how she still wants to do that. I was perfectly willing to, just exclude the month of February or perhaps save this book for March, but she insists on doing this while she's either while having her honeymoon or while she's either in the process of getting married or something like that. But shout out to Bevan again for recommending some pretty quality books. Because again, Beautiful Country was a book that I read for my book club. And it might be on my year-end list because it was just so great. But yeah, How the Other Half Eats should be an interesting story about food inequality and stuff like that, but I don't know the specifics of it, which I'm looking forward to finding out. I also want to get to No Man's Land, which is a comic that I checked out from my local library. Again, it is Batman. I wanted to read this because it does seem like it upsets the status quo in Gotham City quite a bit by making Gotham sealed off from the rest of the world. So I want to see how what ideas they explore in this comic series and what events happen and how Batman tries to fix everything. I'm also going to read God Country, which is a random comic book that I checked out from my local library. I don't quite know what that's about, but I guess we'll find out when we get to it. And then the last book that I want to read is Mox by John Moxley, a wrestler who I am very much a fan of and can't wait to see, what's in his autobiography. So look out for that too. And then short stories. I do have a number of short stories planned or ideas of what I want to read. It is Black History Month, and I do want to amplify Black voices, not simply because it is Black History Month, but because I haven't amplified Black voices in a while. But you should still, hype up Black voices in February, as well as the rest of the year, which I've been trying to do. So I think I'm going to read Little Miss Sophie by Alice Dunbar. I've actually read a short story by her husband, Paul Lawrence Dunbar, who the short story I forget the name of, The Scapegoat. It was really good, and it's one of those that I recommend just because of the plot and the story and how it comes together is pretty excellent. And then also 202 Checkmates by Rian Amilcar Scott, which I don't think I've read before. Look out for that, and a couple other short stories as well. And then the other short stories, the other thing that I want to talk about is poems. So I don't have any particular poems planned, but again, it is Black History Month, so exploring more Black poets could be necessary. And I feel like there's a couple famous Black poets that I haven't talked about on this channel yet, so be on the lookout for that. Anyway, that is what I read in January and what I plan to read in February. If you have any recommendations for me, or you want to comment on the stuff that I read in January, let me know below. I'm always willing to, have a conversation or even, hear about the books that are being recommended. I'll throw it on the pile because I do have a lot of books to get through, but I'm always willing to take a a side turn or like a side quest to read something that might profoundly change my life, or even just change it a tiny bit. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this channel as well as the interesting books that I am reading. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and February travels. Farewell.